So my name is Woody ZUILL, and I've been doing programming of computers since 1982, which was before some of you were born, maybe. But I started late. I was 30 years old when I started programming. So I was working, I had a little company that we made graphics and signage for businesses and trade show displays and museum displays. And as we did this, computers started taking over that industry. It started becoming important to know about computers and to be able to use computers. So I bought a couple computers, and they were pretty good, but the software was terrible. So I would use the software and it would crash and the data would get corrupted and nothing worked very well. And there was software that we needed to have. So I talked to my wife and she said, you know, these people are making money writing really bad software. I bet you could make money writing really bad software. So I started learning to program. So by 1983, I was programming quite a bit, but it wasn't until 1998 that I changed my career to just writing software. I was mostly writing software that I needed in my company. So for the first 15 years of programming, I worked alone. I was the only programmer, and I didn't have any employees to write software. I just wrote software for myself. So I learned to solo program. And computers are made to work solo, right? They have a keyboard and a little screen. And even in those days, the screen on my computer was smaller than this. So, you know, you had to sit like this, looking at the screen all day. So I'm going to try and find my slides. Let's see if I can find my slides. So after a few, I would say, years of writing software, it became more interesting to me to write software than the other work that I was doing. So I switched my career. But by that time, I don't know which version of this I want to do. That's 23. That looks pretty recent. We'll do that one. Yeah, this ought to do. We'll see what happens. I didn't want that to happen. There we go. All righty. Anyway, pair programming was starting. How many of you here have done pair programming? Pair programming, okay, almost everybody. And so I heard about it and I thought, that seems interesting. I'd like to learn how to do that. I was already 45 years old. I was old enough to realize that if something sounds too crazy, then it's probably worth learning about. If it sounds crazy, it may be something I should do. And the people that I learned pair programming from told me about a thing called driver navigator. And that's where the person at the keyboard is acting as a driver and the person with them is acting as a navigator. You can think of it like getting into a taxi cab. You get into the taxi, there's a driver, but you don't say to the driver, where would you like to go today? Right? You're the one who knows where you want to go. So you tell the person where you want to go. That means you're navigating. But if you know exactly where you want to go, like I want to go to the airport, then they know how to get you to the airport. But if you want to go to a very specific spot that isn't like the airport, you have to guide them there. So you might say, just an example of something maybe I tried to do once. I want to see where my ancestors lived in Bishop Stortford in the UK. They lived there, they left there in 1630, around 1630. That's quite a ways ago. I can't just say, take me to where my great-grandfathers lived 400 years ago. They wouldn't know, they don't know who I am, and they don't know, it's not like take me to the airport, so I need to guide them. First, we need to get close to this. Then, there's a church, and when we see the church, we need to make a right turn. And then we go across 3 bridges, and then we'll make a left turn. I have some directions. I'm navigating. So to me, that's driver, navigator. And then we stumble upon this idea of a whole team working together, and we need some techniques to do that. And we use that driver navigator technique. The main aspect of driver navigator is we're going to say out loud what we want, And everybody who's there will understand where we're going and what we're going to try to do. And they all contribute as we go. So that grew into mob programming within just a very short amount of time. I had learned this concept of, oh, that's showing poorly. Yeah, let's keep that nearby if I sneeze, okay? Here's the thing, is that the people that would be working together need to communicate, and we adopted a very simple concept that came from Llewellyn Falco. There were people here in Paris who had been experimenting with coding dojos. You know what I mean by coding dojo, okay? So coding dojo, they were experimenting here. He heard somebody talking about this at a conference in the US, and he brought it to me and said, hey, there's this way of being together coding that's more than just two people. It's more than pair. Well, I'd been experimenting with that going back quite a ways, maybe 2005 and before. What is it like to have more than two people at the computer? So this is how mob programming came to be. And what I want to talk about today is what I would call advanced mob programming. It's not about advanced techniques. It's about the kind of thinking that we had put in place that led to having an opportunity for something like mob programming to grow. So I'm now calling it software teaming as opposed to mob programming. I originally called it mob programming because some people wrote about this idea of more than one person, more than two people at one computer back in 2001 or about then in a book called Extreme Programming Perspectives, and it was a paper that was presented at the Extreme Programming Conference that year. And I read about it, and it was more than one person, and more than two people. And so we were doing the same thing, so I thought we'll use the same name. But there's two things I didn't like about that. One is, in the Scandinavian countries, mob or mobbing means to bully. And that's sort of got a negative connotation. But also people would say, oh, I'm not a programmer, I'm a product owner, or I'm a tester. So I really don't do mob programming because I'm not a programmer. But I really want to include all those people. And so I thought, what is a better name? So rather than mob programming, it's software teaming. That's what I'm calling it now. I don't care what you call it. Call it whatever you want. It's the idea of let's get good at collaborating. Let's get good at working together. So I always start with this slide in my talks. Oh, I hope this is the right talk. We'll see. If it's not, I'll just give whatever talk this is. I always start with this from Peter Block. I'm not here to tell you what to do. That would be silly. I'm here to just share some of the things we did and some of the thinking we did. And that is what I think can be helpful because it gives us hope that we can figure out for ourselves how to work in the environment that we're working in. So when we first started doing this, we had experience with pair programming, I had, and I had worked with some larger teams. And I'll tell just a little bit of this story as we go. But I'm just going to share some of the things we were thinking about. And I just ask that you keep an open mind. With as many people here as doing pair programming, I'm sure you have an open mind. How many of you are doing mob programming? Show of hands. So there's more than half of you already. So what do we need this talk for anyways? But let's go ahead and do it. So I'll give a really quick introduction to mob programming or software teaming. So I think of it this way. It's all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time in the same space. And that is what I think Agile brings us. But that we're all doing it at the same computer is what pair programming brings to us, expanded slightly. Pair programming with more than two people. So if we're not working on the same thing, we cannot be collaborating. We have to work on the same thing. That's pretty straightforward. However, if we work on it at the same time, it's a much better chance of us collaborating. In the days before pair programming and mob programming, people will often schedule things so that somebody would conceptualize the project over a few months, and then somebody would start gathering requirements. Then somebody maybe would do a architectural design, and then another group would do the physical design of the pages or in those days, the forms or whatever. And so we weren't working at the same time. We were spreading it out. They would finish their work, and then we would do our work. And then the next, so to me, this is just saying, if we're doing things at the same time, we can collaborate. We add to this the same space. That means we're close to each other. It's easier to collaborate. So this is all about collaboration, and I think that's what Agile gives us. But we take this a step further. With mob programming, we're all sitting at the same computer. And I like to think of it this way. If we can gather together all the people, or the people with all the skills and capabilities we need, then we can work well together and collaborate. This gets rid of the queuing and other problems that happen when we are working in some kind of phase gate approach. You know, phase gate is like waterfall kind of approach. To think of it differently, this allows us to work directly from start to finish on something without the wastes of queuing and inventory. So to me, this is an advanced concept. Mob programming worked for us the very first day we did it, and we did it by accident. And that it was working for us surprised us to see. And we didn't start the day thinking, let's all sit together and work. We started the day by simply, one of the team members said, I have some code I want everyone to look at and help me think about, essentially. So we got together in a room, started looking at it, and started talking about the things we could do to change it, and we just went ahead and started working on it. And after about 2 hours, we were asked to leave the room because somebody else had reserved that room. So somebody on the team said, let's just go find another room. Because we realized how good it was working together, and we'd never really done it before. We went and found another room. And at the end of the day, we were doing retrospectives at the end of every day. And I asked, what was good about today? And we all said, working together was really great. What was good about it? We got a lot done. We learned a lot. It was really high quality, and it was fun. Any one of those things is enough for me to say, I want more of this. But at the end of our retrospective at every day, we would ask, how do we get more of the good thing we had today? And we decided, let's just do this again tomorrow. So from that day on, we started working this way every day, and it turned into our way of working within about a week. So from the first day we tried it, the first day we accidentally stumbled on it, we only took about a week where it became our full-time, everyday way of working. All day long, every day, we'd work together, and it looked just like this. In this picture, let's see how this pointer works. Let's see if we can get this to work. It's not working so well. Can we see it pointing? I wish it worked better. I'm going to stand up a little bit. We have a tester, a product owner, 2 coders, a database expert over here, and 2 more coders. So that's the team. We don't need anyone else. We do not have to ask anyone a question to get our work done. We don't need to ask anyone permission to deploy our code. We could answer all of our own questions. This allowed us to work directly from start to finish. This was only about a year at the most since we started working this way. We could get more done more rapidly with higher quality, and it was fun, and we were learning a lot. It can also be done remotely. So let's get through to where we start talking about the advanced stuff in just a moment. It's essentially, it's not 5 people watching one person coding. If it would, that would be a silly thing. What it is 5, 6, 7, whatever number of people actually collaborating all day long. And I would say we need some techniques for doing that, and we borrowed the technique from pair programming of the driver and navigator. But now we have more navigators. But we still need techniques because, other techniques, because we don't want the navigators all shouting out at the same time. We have to be very organized. That's the wrong word. We have to be very, we have to pay attention to how we are interacting with each other so that we can do this without chaos. And what we found is we were using this guideline that came from Llewellyn and Falco. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. And that requires that we communicate well, that we get good at explaining ourselves, that we get good at that we get good at trying other people's ideas, that we're willing to accept that other people might have ideas that are better than our own, that we take anyone's idea that we want to try, and we all work together to complete the idea, that we don't stop in the middle of it. We support each other's ideas. These were important parts of what we were doing. It seems crazy, but people have been doing it all over the world. I've visited now every continent except the South Pole, and there are people doing this in many, many countries. So I'm just going to show quickly some pictures of different people all over the world doing this. And let's go on to the advanced stuff. So that was a quick introduction. For those of you who'd never heard of mob programming or software teaming and never done it. So I'm going to share, boy, I hope I'm going down the right set of slides. We'll find out a little bit about my first job. When I was 13 years old, I believe I got my first job. I was watering plants in a nursery. Plants are in little containers like you have around here, and there are thousands of them, and you take a watering wand and you water each plant. And my boss, when he hired me, said, you've got two responsibilities. The first responsibility is that you need to water the plants, but you don't want to just keep the plants alive. You want to give them a condition where they can thrive. This was really important. He gave me a book. He said, you need to learn the water needs of each kind of plant, because each species has a different water requirement. Some need more water, some need less water. Some need to be watered more frequently, some need to be watered less frequently. Some of them you need to let dry out before you give them water again. They all have different needs, and you're going to need to learn about that. So he gave me a book about those needs. But he also told me you have another responsibility, and that is you need to pay attention. And when you notice something we could do better, then I want to hear about it, and we'll figure out how to do it better. So he was asking me, now remember, I'm 13 years old, and he was probably in his 50s, let's say 55, and he's treating me like an equal. He's treating me as somebody who has a brain, who can think, and can help make things better. And he understood this, and I think it was quite an important thing, that if we have tiny improvements over time, they have a compounding effect. Things will get better and better and better if we follow this path. Now, there was a fellow who wrote a book about this called Atomic Habits. And in that book, he has this chart. This chart shows if you have a one-day compounding period, every day for a year, you will get a 37.78 times increase if you can get just a 1% increase per day. Imagine if you could do that with your investments. Would you be working as a software developer if you could do this with your investments? I don't think you would be. You'd make so much money. So here's the point. If we can just get these little improvements and we can compound them over time, however long it takes, I put this in Excel to prove it to myself. And yep, this is the exact same curve that he had. So let's just have this tiny improvements habit. But what I found was that's really hard to get. So this is, to me, what advanced mob programming is about, is what are the things, the kind of thinking that we had in place on the day I was hired to go work at this company where we ended up landing on the idea of mob programming. Now, I've got 3 days of material on this, and I'm going to try and condense it into a very short period of time here tonight, maybe an hour or an hour and a half. What time will you start falling asleep? Or are you already falling asleep? It's hard to stay awake. You've already been working hard all day. I have to say thank you for coming very much. Thank you, and I'm honored to be here. Okay, so let's look at this. It's hard to follow this simple rule. It's hard to set aside the time to make the improvements that we need to make. This is one of the reasons that we don't make improvements in our companies. It's because instead of focusing on the improvements, we're focusing on getting our work done. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think that makes things hard to manage. Are there any managers here? Is anyone here a manager? 1, 2? I always insult the managers. So I apologize. I've been a manager pretty much all my life in some form. Not on that first job, but later. You know, by the time I was 16, I had my first business. I bought a pickup truck and a couple lawnmowers, and I would go around the town mowing lawns for people. So that's only a one-person business, but I went and hired 2 kids at school And I took them with me, and they would mow the lawns where I went out and would talk to the homeowners to find people where we could mow their lawns. So try manage, if you're a manager and you're managing software developers and you think that's hard, try managing 15-year-olds mowing lawns. That's hard, okay. So I learned to start managing when I was quite young. So what makes things difficult? I'm going to ask you right now, answer this for me. Over the last few months, over the last year, what has gotten in the way of you being effective in getting your work done? You can just shout it out. What makes it hard for you to get your work done? Yes. Interruptions. A bad code base, like technical debt or bad naming and code smells and so on. What else? What's that? Lack of documentation, and sometimes too much documentation. So those are both problems. Yes. What's that? Postponing, always changing priorities and deadlines are moving. Yes, and you had one. When somebody's not here, is that what you're saying? Can someone? The goals are not clear. Excellent. What else? When I can't do it, I'm incompetent. What else? Let's hear 3 or 4 more. What makes it hard to be effective at work? Not being motivated. You don't have the right tools. I've worked at places where all we needed was a little more memory and our builds would speed up a whole lot. And we can't talk them into buying a little more memory. You know, things like that. What else? 2 more. No tests. No automated tests that run with 1 click. What else? Legacy code. And I love legacy code, but it can make it very hard. Okay, that's probably enough. Okay, I usually do this when I do workshops. I've done this exercise hundreds of times. This was a place in Boston. They came up, 20 people in 3 minutes came up with this list. So I'll read off a couple of them. So context switching, workflow interruptions, distractions, technical blockers, waiting on a dependency, meetings, a monolithic architecture, technical debt, unclear requirements, time zone differences, not taking enough time the first time. Now, I don't know if any of these are things that you have, but you listed some of these off. And I've done this exercise enough times where I have about a list somewhere of 200 unique things that get in our way. And so this is what I've noticed about it. There are many of these, and I'm putting it in quote, problems. They stay with us for a long time. If I were to come back here a year later, we'd get the same list, okay? And they are everywhere I go. Why are they so persistent? Why are they so profuse? Why are they so persistent? Why are they so pervasive? This is a question I asked myself back in 1999. And during this thing in 1999, I noticed this. I was working at a place. They would do a retrospective every 6 weeks. This was before Agile. At the retrospective, the first one, we found some problems. I don't go into too much detail, but in this case, it happened to be our estimates were off, our requirements weren't clear when we started, and the requirements kept changing. This is real common everywhere I go. So we decided, let's get better at that, and then we went back to do our work. So after the next 6 weeks, we do another retrospective, same thing. Same problems, same decision of we need to get better, and off we go to do our work. After the third retrospective, same thing. What's wrong here? This is a pattern. I saw this pattern and I stood up in a meeting. Now, this is right after I started working for other people doing software development. So I still felt I was an amateur. I was just I was a beginner. We had 200 people on this development team. These are the things they decided were in their way. So after 3 iterations, that's 4.5 months, I think, I stood up and I said, I see a problem here. The problem is that we keep trying to solve the same problems and we're not getting any better. And I called this the cycle of continuous no improvements. You don't want a cycle of continuous no improvements. You want a cycle of improvements. This is really important to me. I'm going to get me something to drink here. 1 second. I just showed up in Paris on Friday. I think I'm getting adjusted to the time zone difference, but I got to make sure I'm drinking something. Okay, so here's the thing. I saw this as a problem, and that they weren't seeing it as a problem puzzled me. But this is the bottom line of the issue. Are we dealing with the problems or are these symptoms? And I think they're symptoms. So I'm telling you the ideas I was thinking about that led to mob programming. So this is 1999 when I first started thinking about this, and I started taking notes about it. And I think these almost are all symptoms. They're an indication of a problem. They're not the problem themselves, but we cannot solve symptoms, and they were trying to solve the symptoms. One symptom is our estimates were off. Now, again, it doesn't matter what they are. Another one they had was we didn't understand the requirements well when we started during this iteration, and they kept changing. Those are all symptoms of some other problem. If we try to solve the symptoms, all we do is hide the problem. An example is if I had a cold, which right now I don't, and I test myself with COVID very regularly on these trips, just so you know. But let's say I did have COVID and I had a bad cold and a headache or a bad stuffed up congested, a bad headache, a sore throat. I don't know what things you can get. I did get COVID on a trip when I was in Scandinavia. It wasn't too bad. And I'm still alive. Yeah. Anyways, if I took a decongestant to get rid of the stuffy nose and a cough suppressant to get rid of a cough and a pain reliever to get rid of the headache, I still have COVID. I just got rid of some of the symptoms. So we're not paying attention to, do we have the problem? We're just dealing with some of the symptoms. We can't solve for the symptoms. But I think there's a bigger conundrum. And I would ask this question: can we solve problems? And I'm not sure we can in some domains. And I call this the problem with problems. Often today's solution becomes tomorrow's problem. So what does that look like? Is we solve something and we just really have not solved it. We've moved it to a different location. We're no longer thinking about it the same way. We think we've addressed the problem, but we haven't. So I call this the problem with problems. And I think this is a big issue in a lot of the things that we do. Things are hard to manage because we focus on solving problems. And this brings us to another thought: the misplaced focus of management. Management is focused on solving problems most places I visit. That's their focus, okay? And one of the big problems is it's hard to manage things. So they think that's a problem we need to solve. So this is the question: how do we solve for it being hard to manage things? Usually the solution is to try to make it easy to manage. That seems like a logical thing, but it's not. Here's the point. When we make things easy to manage, we make it hard to actually do the work. So this quote is from Peter Drucker. Hopefully some of you know who Peter Drucker was. He was a famous guru of management. And this is attributed to him. I have not found any reference of where he actually said this. So much of what we call management consists in making it difficult for people to work. And if that's true, we got to do something about that. Does that seem like it makes sense to you? I see a few heads nodding here. So why do we let this happen? And that's what I want to get onto here. So I call this advanced mob programming because these were the things I was trying to address from about 1999 and really before, but 1999 till 2009, when I was trying to figure out how can we make things better in the places I worked. This was one thing I saw very commonly. Well, why do we let this happen? It's because of these two things: beliefs and biases. So beliefs are the things we believe to be true, and we act on those things. Okay, we act on the things we believe to be true. And I got this next drawing from somebody named Dave Gray, who wrote this book, Liminal Thinking, but I was following him before he wrote this particular book. He also wrote the book called Game Storming, and he used this drawing. He shows reality. Reality is everything. We cannot see reality. There's so much more there than we can ever be exposed to, but we can be exposed to some things, and we can call that our life or our experience. Here's one of the big problems. Of all of our experiences, we only can pay attention to a very small bit. That's the small bit that gets into our brain that actually sticks to some degree. And upon that, we build our theories, we make judgments, and they become our beliefs. Okay, and then we say something like this: it's obvious. Is that really obvious? Here's the problem. All of these important things we do are based on a really thin thread of experience and attention, only a little bit of data. This is problematic. So things are hard to manage because what we think is true probably isn't true. It's based on this very thin thread. Now, these were my observations, and then I was reading and studying a lot, and this next thing we're going to get into will affect this quite a bit. So is what I'm talking about a truth? I'm not quite sure yet. But the obvious is necessary for us. We cannot exist without having beliefs. Otherwise, it would take us too long to make decisions, and we'd run out of energy. Our brain uses a lot of energy, and we would run out of energy and time for thinking if we had to think about everything. If you read the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, great book to read. Okay, we need the beliefs, but they limit us. And I'll share a limiting belief in a little bit. I hope you were expecting a lecture, because that's what I'm doing. I'm lecturing you. So biases is the other side of that. So we have our beliefs, but then we have our biases, which makes pretty much, in my understanding, most of our beliefs are wrong. Okay, here's a list of biases, and they're grouped into categories and subcategories. So don't read all of those. I'm going to end up talking about one of them. We'll talk about confirmation bias, but you can find this in Wikipedia or whatever. So you've all heard of this. If you've gone to any talks in the last 5 years, people are always talking about confirmation bias, but it's very important. We're biased to confirm or want to, confirm the things we already believe in. And this is what happens to us. We will search for information based on our biases. We will then filter whatever we find based on our biases. We will then interpret it based on our biases. You can see none of this is good. And we will modify our memories based on our biases. So yeah, whatever we believe will just become stronger and stronger over time. So we have a problem because things are hard to manage, because it's our human nature to confirm the things that we want to believe to still be true, to actually be true. And we will ignore the stuff that tells us when we're wrong. But even worse is this, and I don't know the name of this bias. If anybody knows, please let me know. We want to confirm what it is we want to be true. We want to get the proof that proves that what we want to be true, we don't yet believe. The thing we want to believe is true. And I think we have that same bias. So this is a problem. And here's an example of a limiting belief, a belief that limits us. And this has to do with our biases. We believe we succeeded. We believe we succeeded because we did the things the right way, that we knew what we were doing, that we were smart. Okay, and this comes from Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So he says success is talent plus luck. To have your job and do well with your job, you have to have both of these things. We have to have some luck and we have to have some talent. But he says great success is a little more talent and a lot more luck. I'm almost exactly the age of Bill Gates. You can see what I'm saying here. Now, I don't think I'm even close to being as talented or not smart as he is, but you get the idea. It's like with the right turn of luck, being at the right place at the right time with the right whatever, you can see a lot of success. We'll see another quote about that in just a minute. Because we believe that success is what's driving us, let me put it the opposite way, that what we did is driving our success, I think is problematic. Success is about randomness, and we think that our success is because we did things the right way. So I'm going to share a quote in just a minute that I think will address this. We want to tell others, this is why I succeeded. This is why you should hire me. Because look at the success I had. It's because we made the right decisions. Now, I'm going to make it really clear. I'm here telling you about mob programming stuff today because I got my career to the place where I was ready to take on a challenge of working with a team that wasn't doing very well. And I had enough confidence that I could insist to the management that we would have no interference. That if you want me to work with this team, we're going to do it, but you cannot tell us what to do. We have to have the right to decide for ourselves. Now, that is all that happened. And what came out of it happened to be mob programming. And we became very successful with that team. And that team has grown where the same location, the same company, we had the one team. Now all the software development teams are working this way. That was 12 years ago, 13 years ago that we started working this way. I want to share this thing. It's called Brian's First Law. So Brian's First Law, at some time in the life cycle of virtually every organization, its ability to succeed in spite of itself runs out. We are succeeding not because of the things we're doing, but in spite of the things we're doing. We're succeeding because we're getting the good luck that we need to have. So how do we deal with this? That's what this whole talk is about. So I want to share with you now something called I call failure to communicate. Have you ever heard of Wheel's Law? Or it's really Wheel's Laws? Has anybody heard of Wheel's Laws? So I get to share something new with you. Okay, Wheel's Law is like this. His fundamental law. Communication usually fails except by accident. So that means tonight, as I'm telling you all this stuff, if any of this gets through, that's by accident. Matter of fact, if I asked you right now, do you understand? And you all shake your head, yes. I have no way of knowing that you understood me because it's your understanding that you're agreeing with. Not what I said, but what you believe about what I said. So let's look at some more of his laws. If communication can fail, it will. If communication cannot fail, it still usually fails. And I would say it always fails. I don't see communication succeeding very frequently. There's more laws. I'm going to share maybe 2 more, and there's a couple more if this is really worth looking into. If communication seems to succeed in the intended way, there's been a misunderstanding. So we're all done with the meeting. Everybody agrees. We go off to do our work, and it turns out we're not operating on the same understanding. You can see where this is leading to mob programming, those of you who have done mob programming. We'll get there later. If you are content with our message, communication certainly has failed. So at the end of a talk, when I give a talk like this, people come up, how did your talk go? And I say, I don't know. Because if I'm happy with it, I know I failed. So I don't take that chance. Here's 2 that I really love. If a message can be interpreted in several ways, it will be interpreted in the manner that maximizes the damage. Twitter, anyone? They call it X now. There's one more that I cut the slide out, but it's, there is always somebody who knows better than you with what you meant with your message. There's always someone who knows better than you what you meant to say. Yikes. Okay. So remember this thing about the tiny bit of attention. If I have my set of experiences and tiny bit of attention, and that's going to be my truth, and you have the same thing, some experience, your experience, and a tiny bit of attention, then you're going to have your truth, and I'm going to have my truth. They're both truths within our realm of reality. This is a big problem. I see it in politics. I see it in communities. I see it everywhere I go. I see it in companies. So let's move on to systems and domains. So I don't know if we're going to need a break somewhere along the way. It depends on how late we go. Do you want me to just keep rambling ahead? Okay. Start telling me if you need to take a break. If you really need to go use the restroom, just go use the restroom, okay? Don't wait for a break. Okay, so I want to talk about systems and domains. A quick definition of a system. This is my own definition. It serves me. It's built on other people's definitions. A system is an interconnected and interacting set of elements that achieves some result. It's whatever they do is what they do. And I like the way that Arthur Jones is attributed with having put it. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets, not to get the results you wanted. This is the problem with designing a system. We're not talking about a computer system. We're talking about a system for human interaction or managing that kind of a system. Okay, there are systems within systems. And I take this quote from Donella Meadows. And to me, it looks like this. If we have a system of the work, that might be just what we actually do. Outside of that might be a defined system of the work, where we define the work we do. We might not follow that, but that's our defined system of the work. Outside of that might be a system of management, how we manage the work and the kinds of things we need to do in managing the work. And then outside of that might be a system of this is an important one, our purpose. Why are we doing these things? The reason I'm sharing this, and this diagram is just something I use to help myself understand this. But the reason I share this is often the level where a symptom shows itself, like what is getting in the way of us being effective? The technical debt, or that we don't have tests in place, whatever it is. Wherever the problem manifests itself, that's not the place we can fix it. We have to step out at least one system. But as we step out these systems, it may be many systems deep where the symptom first showed itself to where we can find a way to solve that problem. So here's what I've found over time. It may be symptoms stacked on symptoms till we finally get to the place where we can even view the problem. So this is a problem I often see within companies. It's hard to manage because we rarely understand this, that we can't solve a problem where we find the problem. Have you ever had a boss, I don't know if they do this in France, who would say, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. Have you ever had a boss that said that? That means they don't know what they're doing. I'll be really clear with this. If a boss does not understand that where you discover the symptom, that you can come up with a solution, this isn't the right place to be thinking. Okay, that's my opinion. All this is my opinion. Those of you who might watch this, if you see this somewhere, who aren't here right now, please understand, I'm not telling you truths. I'm telling you my viewpoint, right? It's based on my thin thread of experience. I'm not a guru. I don't know what I'm doing. They don't even know where this can be addressed. So I see this over and over again. But things also are not isolated. So here's our nice, clean layers of systems. We think we're in control, but around us are many other systems, and they interfere with what we're doing, and they impact us in ways we have no control over. Okay? This is important to me. Again, I'm talking to you about the thinking that I was doing that was leading up to wanting to work with a team to try and discover better ways to work. So a little bit more about the nature of systems. I love this quote from John Gall. Wonderful book. I think it was written in the 70s. A working complex system has invariably evolved from a working simple system. That is telling us we cannot design a system. It has to have evolved. If that's true, all the systems that you see out there people have presented, such as Scrum or SAFe or any system that somebody's invented or gathered together, this is telling us that probably isn't going to work. This is what we're up against. Now, Donella Meadows says this, it's really important to paraphrase this. One of the underlying powers of a system is it can perpetuate itself. What does that mean? That means that almost anything we try to do to fix a system will not work. She says it will only temporarily give us the benefit we want to get by attempting to change the system. Now, this is getting more and more negative. By now you're saying we have no hope, right? We can't, things are getting worse and everything he's telling us, it's worse than the last thing he told us. So I do have hope. I do have hope. I hope that I die before things get much worse. No, that's just a joke. My father used to say, I just hope I get all the way to the end of my life before I die. And I thought that is a pretty good joke. Okay, so back to what Arthur Jones said. The system does what it does, and it was designed to do that. And so what are we going to do about it? And this is one of the issues. Things are hard to manage because the system is good at perpetuating itself. And it does this by evolving. In other words, it doesn't stay the same. It doesn't perpetuate itself by staying the same. It perpetuates itself so that it can evolve around the things that get in its way. If we think about evolution, like maybe we evolved over many thousands and thousands of years, that's what we're talking about here. Like there once was a creature of some sort that could reproduce. Once that life started, that was a simple system and it could evolve. Eventually they got ways to sense light. And eventually those ways of sensing light turned into our eyeballs, right? But that was through evolving. So these things won't change through intervention. These things won't change by transformations or adoptions. So what are we going to do about it? We'll come back to that. And it won't change the way we want it to. So again, this was all the thinking I was doing, and we're starting to get to some practical stuff now. You all know Kinevin? Who knows Kinevin? 4 or 5, so another somewhat new thing for you. So Kinevin comes out of the thinking of Dave Snowden. Dave Snowden put these ideas together probably 20 years ago. I learned about them in 2007. So here's 4 domains. There's actually 5 showing here. The one in the middle is sort of an unknown space. We're not sure where we're at yet, or it's confusion. I'm not sure what they call it. But the other 4 are clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic. In the US, we can buy a can of dough. This is the clear space. I can buy that can of dough, and if I follow the instructions, I can create some biscuits we can eat. Okay, it shows a picture of it right on the can. If you just follow the instructions, there are no unknowns. You don't even need to mix the dough. You just buy the dough, you put it on the cookie pan, you put it into the oven, and in 15 minutes or whatever, you watch it. If it turns golden brown, you're ready to eat. This is the clear space. You just follow the instructions. You don't need to make hardly any decisions, and it works every time. But what if you want really good croissants? I understand probably they invented croissants here. Is that right? Do any of you bake? Do you bake croissants? Okay, to bake croissants requires expertise. You don't just open up the dough and put it on a pan. You have to understand how fine is the flour. Is it the same as I'm used to? Are these eggs as big as the ones I used last time? Is the fat in this milk equal? Is the butter I'm using equal? Am I rolling out the same thinness? There's a lot to know about. You need to understand all the details. But when you understand all the details, you're not following a recipe as much as you are adjusting the recipe as you go, so that every day you can get really good croissants. Now in the US, you can't get really good croissants, but here you get them all over the place. You have like every 3rd shop is a bakery. And every 3rd shop has better bread than they have anywhere in the US. So you're very fortunate here. I went out to outlying neighborhood in Paris 2 or 3 years, before the pandemic. And I was walking from the bus station to where I was going to meet the people that I was going to have dinner with. I passed dozens of people carrying a baguette, they call baguette, in a paper sleeve, dozens and dozens. And I finally passed the bakery where they were buying the bread, and the line was out the door. People were buying this bread. So we don't get that in the US. Nobody's that interested, I guess, but you come here, you get really good bread. But think about this. We know what we need to keep in track of, but we need to pay a lot of attention and make decisions as we go. Is this dough a little too runny? Is it too thick? We need to be paying attention. And I believe the way you make croissants is you roll the dough out, and you put some butter, and you fold it over, and you roll it out, and you put some butter. And you need to know how how to do this. It takes expertise. You're making decisions all the way along. But you know what the unknowns are, and you're paying attention to them. Now we get into complex world. This is molecular gastronomy. They're going to invent a new food. They're going to invent a new way of combining the ingredients. They're going to invent a new way of heating it, or a different way of heating it, and different combinations. Things like making candy happened over years of people understanding how to heat the sugars and then cool them off, temper them, heat them again and temper them, and roll them out and heat them again. And there's all kinds of processes you go through. Once you understand it, it probably moves into the complicated space. But until then, you're working with unknowns. You don't know the end result until you get what you want. And you don't even know what you want at first. Let's say you think, let's try and make a new dessert. But as you start mixing things and combining things and coming up with new ideas, you end up with something you go, this might be good as a gravy on chicken. So you end up with a very different result than where you started. This is the complex world. The last one is chaotic. The domain of chaos is how I cook, okay? I'm going to cook the biscuits. I open up the can, I put them on the thing, I put them and then I go in the other room and I forget I'm cooking biscuits. And then somebody goes, do you smell the smoke? And now my house is, well, at least my oven's on fire. So I've had that happen enough. So what do? When you have something like this, I call this, my biscuits are burning. Does anyone know where that comes from? Yosemite Sam. Does anybody here know Yosemite Sam? That was a Bugs Bunny character, if you remember Bugs Bunny. And there was a movie called Jessica Rabbit, and he says, my biscuits are burning. So I like that saying. So you just follow your fluency. When the biscuits are burning, you follow your fluency. In my case, I already know what to do in a case of a fire. So when I start cooking, I always make a wet dishcloth and I leave it by the oven. So when the thing catches on fire, I can open the oven and I can throw the dishcloth over the burning thing, and then the fire's out. But what if the whole stove caught on fire? I had a friend whose daughter was making deep fat fried chicken, and she put the chicken into the fat, and then it all flowed over onto the stove, and the whole place caught on fire. So do you say, oh, what should we do? No, you just start screaming and you run out of the building, right? You're not going to get killed. And you don't spend time going, what could we have done to avoid having a fire? You do that afterwards. After the fire's been put out, then you decide, what could we have done different next time? That moves it into the simple space or the complicated space. These are the domains. So here's the importance of the domains. We need different tactics in each domain. If we don't understand the domains exist, we're going to have a problem. A lot of people don't understand the problem itself, and they don't understand the domain the problem's in. So they use tactics. Let's say they're in the complex space, they use tactics that will work in the complicated space or in the simple space. That's what they understand. We need to see the different domains that we're in. So we can't take suitable action if we don't understand this. So now we're to the real practical stuff. These are the things we covered so far. And now I'm going to tell you how I thought about it. Don't go and do what I did, because I'm just sharing with you how I got to where I got. But you're already at a different space. If somebody had already been talking about mob programming before we ever did it, we would just have to hear them talk about it and say, let's give it a try. We stumbled upon it. That was a part of how I was thinking at that time. Let's do as many experiments as we can. Okay, so the practical stuff starts here. I want to cover these few things. And I'd like to cover a lot more, but we only have an hour. And I'm only going to cover a little bit of each one of these. Turn up the good, working smarter, make it easy, the bubble, collaborate rather than communicate, and lead from within. So these are the things I was attempting to put in place in 2011, not knowing where we would end up. So turn up the good comes from things I did as a child and from my boss when I was 13 years old, but I've seen it so nicely defined by Kent Beck. Hopefully everyone here knows of Kent Beck. He's probably visited Paris many times, but he's written some very important books. And if it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't have learned about pair programming, because I think he originated the idea. So he talked about the things he was doing back in 1998 or 99. And he says this, when I first articulated XP, I looked at all these practices we were doing as if they were the knobs on a control board. And I thought, each knob is a practice that I had experience with and I knew worked well. What if I turned up those knobs? This is what it means to me. He had experience, and experience is we've actually had physical contact with this. We've done this in a practical manner, and we know it works. He's reflecting on it. That's like doing a retrospective. What's the value here? Is there anything meaningful? What can we do about this? And then he's saying, let's experiment with it. Let's turn it up and let's see what we get. And I think this is really straightforward. I see this done very infrequently. So because I think this is important, this was the foundation of me starting. This idea of turn up the good was important. Now I'm going to run through Russell Acuff's stuff quickly because we don't want to be here till midnight, right? So Russell Acuff, you should read Russell Acuff's writing and thinking, very valuable. He has these 4 things he talks about. How do we treat problems? Absolution is kind of like we ignore it. And maybe it'll go away. Okay, and the next one is resolve it, which is really, in my opinion, you do something that yields a good enough outcome. What to me, this is when we deal with the symptoms. It looks like we solved the problem. All we did was deal with the symptoms. I think when he gets to this one, actually solving it, you have to find the problem. And then you need to figure out how to deal with it. And I don't think we can, as I said earlier, that this works, but he's just defining these things. What he believes, let's see if we can get here, is the word dissolve. And he says it this way, to eliminate it by redesigning the system that has the problem. Now, if Russell Acuff was here, he's no longer with us, but if he was here, he could put me in my place, right? He's a much deeper thinker than me, and he understands these things at a much higher level than I do. But I don't agree with this. I think that redesigning the system will never work based on what my experience has been. So this is what I like. I think this is the way to think about it. And at first I call this evaporate. And this goes back to what we did earlier. What are all the problems we have that are making it difficult for us to be effective? Rather than focus on the problems, let's just focus on what's going well. And now I'm calling this pre-solution. I thought that would be a word, but it's not a word. So I invented a word. I'm like Shakespeare, right? I invented a word. So actually, I heard someone else use this word, and I looked it up, and I couldn't find it in the dictionary. And the idea is, how do we deal with these things? When we start working well as a team, many of those problems faded away. All of these problems that I listed, we did not set out to solve a single one. All we set out is to improve our ability to collaborate. And as soon as we started getting, we're collaborating in real time, a whole team. Watch this really effective animation. Those things faded away. I didn't get quite the reaction I was hoping for. I'm going to do it again. Those things sort of faded away. It took me several hours to figure out how to do that. Now, that was 10 years ago, but several hours to figure that out. By turning up the good on collaboration, a lot of those problems, which were just symptoms of not collaborating well, disappeared. I didn't know that's what happened, and we'll get to that in a minute. This is the power of turning up the good. When we turn up the good, we don't know what the good's going to be. We get good things we had no way of knowing existed. If we're paying a lot of attention, we may have seen some hints of these things. This is the point I'm trying to make. This is the power of serendipity. I don't know what the translation of serendipity into French would be, but in English, serendipity is good things that happen by luck. We didn't plan on them happening. They just happened, and they were good. So there's a caveat to this. We don't know what the good will be. We don't know where it will lead. So this is really the way I was working, and I think this is what I learned when I was 13 from Mr. Smith. If we have a tiny improvement habit, if we see something we can do better, let's just figure out how to do it better. Let's make things a little more effective every day. Okay, the next thing I want to cover is called working smarter. Do we still have time? Can we continue going? Okay, working smarter. I think the phrase working smarter, versus working harder came along sometime in the 30s. Okay, I was not alive in the 30s. So I looked it up and I found that's like the first references of it. But some people wrote a paper in around the year 2000 called "Nobody Ever Gets Credit for Fixing Problems That Never Happened." Is that not a great, that's scientific research. That's research. I don't know if you call it scientific, but it's research by Sturman and Repenning. And you can find this for free on the internet. This is available as a PDF. Creating and sustaining process improvement. Most of this paper is about, they use causal loop diagrams to show why this is so hard to do, and then they explain their philosophy about it. But the end result is this: the harder we work, then that means the more effort we put in, the more we can get done. With working smarter, the more effort we put in is reduced, and we still could potentially get more done. So when we're working harder, we work hard to get more done. When we work smart, we work less to get more done. And how do we do that? We spend our time improving capability when we're working smarter. When we're working harder, our capability declines. When we work smarter, our capability improves. This is the thing that Mr. Smith understood. So in the end result is our actual performance will drop over time. At first, it will increase when we work harder, but we can't sustain that. We can't keep working harder and harder and harder. There's a limit. But the more time we spend increasing our capability, the more we'll get done for the time we do put in. And the end result from the way they describe it is this: we'll spend more time increasing our capability than doing the work. Do any of you work at a place where you spend more time increasing your capability rather than doing the work they're asking you to do? I want to see anybody's hand go up. I've never worked at such a place. But that was what my goal was when I went on at Hunter, the place where we originated this thinking. So the first thing I did is I put in place, we're going to study together 3 hours every week on Friday. So we'll spend 3 hours improving our abilities. And then as soon as I could, we added an extra hour every day. So we had 5 hours a week plus the 3 hours. So we're now spending 20% of our time increasing our capability. My goal was to get it to where we were spending half of our time increasing our capability. So I never got there. I was only there for 4 years. But I'd like to hear from somebody who's trying to do this. I think it's a great idea. Read that paper. The next thing is about, I call make it easy. I don't have this completely defined well enough yet, but my goal was, remember from that quote from Peter Drucker, and I talked about the misplaced focus of management. So management thinks, let's make it easy to manage. That will destroy our ability to manage it. We think that making it easy to manage means what they'll do. Tell me if you've seen this. Oh, we need some tool where we can document all the features we're going to have. And then we can manage it by seeing how many stories we get done every 2 weeks. And then we know how long it will take to get things done. And we need all these tools and all these meetings and all these systems in place so we can manage this thing. They're trying to make it easier to manage. I won't name any tools, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay? But remember this quote supposedly from Peter Drucker. We're just making it harder for us to get the work done. We need to reverse that. Oh, let me put it back. People are trying to, if you want pictures of this, you have to be really fast. Okay? So let's make it as easy as possible for everyone to do the best they can possibly do. And remember, these are the things I was bringing to a place where they hired me to manage a team that was not doing very well. And I was trying to apply this thinking. So with mob programming, or what we're trying to do here, is optimized for the flow of the work, not for the output of the individual. If we attempt to optimize the output of the individual, we will never get the result of optimizing the flow of the work. If we optimize the flow of the work, we will get the best results we can get, and we don't need to worry about how effective each person is. One of the big problems about performance reviews is we are measuring people's effectiveness, which puts them at odds to each other. They're going to teamwork less and less because they're being reviewed as an individual. And if their performance review isn't good, they won't get the raise or the promotion or the bonus they want. So that means they're competing with everyone else in the company. There's other problems with it too. We're not trying to get the most out of each person. We're trying to find a way to get the best from each person. And it's a very different way of thinking. So this is still, we're in that tiny improvements habit. If we can operate on this just a little bit each day, we can achieve this. I'm always happy with a tiny amount of improvement. We can always make things better. Okay, so I want to talk about the bubble. So when I went to Hunter, 2011, I had this concept. I need to have an isolated location to work so that the rest of the organization does not understand what we're doing. So this has to do with the systems and the domains. Systems perpetuate themselves. So they do that by evolving around anything you attempt to do to make an improvement. The results we'll get won't be what we want. So we need to somehow protect it. So remember I was saying how depressing I was earlier? This worked for me. But in only this, how many years do we have in our life? In only this situation, I've only used this a few times. This was the first time, really the second time I applied this in a slightly larger way. I would like to have 100 opportunities to experiment with this. So this is what I call the bubble, which I get from Michael Sahota. Michael Sahota does training in agile leadership. Here's a diagram he drew in 2013, but it's exactly what I was thinking back in 2011, is I want to have an isolated spot. He's showing this as an arc. The green area is the protected bubble. All I wanted was to protect one team. So if I could protect this team from the rest of the organization, we have a chance to make improvements. How it's going to work is to follow all the things I've already been talking about. My goal was we could grow this to fill out the entire department. And eventually that whole department would be working in new ways, not necessarily the same new ways. But to get this to work, you have to protect the bubble from the rest of the organization. And this organization will destroy us otherwise. So we need adapters. I don't think this pointer is going to work very well for this. Oh, it's working now. You can see these show in Michael's drawing as the adapters. The adapters allow the rest of the organization to work with what's in the bubble as if it's not, the bubble doesn't exist. So how do we get that? How do we get those adapters? This is the way I did it there. For one of the things I wasn't going to do, and I told my team we're not going to do, is we are not going to do estimates. I think estimates are harmful. They're not just wasteful, they're harmful. They lead us to make bad decisions. And the processes that we have in place, remember that earlier one, 1999? Estimates weren't helping us. So what do we need to do? Get better at the estimates. We're dealing with a symptom. We're not dealing with the problem. But the estimates don't matter. It's just one of the things that we weren't going to do on this team. But the rest of the organization needed to know. They wanted the estimates. Well, those estimates is pretend. That's pretend information. That's fake information. It's misinformation. So I wasn't going to do that. So if someone in the rest of the company, let's go back one slide. If someone in the rest of the company wants an estimate, who's going to do the estimate? I told the people that were hiring me, we're not going to do estimates. The person who's in control of our bubble needs to do the estimates. Let's see if I get this to work again. Whoops, go back. Yeah, that's good, we'll be here. That person needs to do the estimates. And this is exactly what I told him. You are the manager over all the software development. If you don't know how long it takes to create software, what makes you think these peons down at the bottom who are just emptying ditches and whatever we do down where we work, how are they going to know how long it takes? This is a fallacy amongst managers. And they will say something like, if you're a professional software developer, you should know how to estimate your work. Well, then let's ask them, well, then how do we do that? Because everything we do to estimate software development, and if this goes out into the internet, everybody's going to tell me I'm wrong. But all the things we do that I've ever seen for estimating software development doesn't work. We pretend it works because we want to believe it works. We covered that earlier. Okay, we need those adapters, and we needed other adapters as well. So the rest of the organization doesn't know what we're doing. So I was also reaching out to other parts of the organization. The light blue area is people who are already ready to think in new ways. The dark blue, those are people who aren't ready to think in new ways. But I start reaching out across the organization to anyone who is willing to have the conversations. My hope was to eventually get them to start their own bubbles. And as those bubbles grew, then eventually the original organization would be weaker than the bubbles. Now the bubbles wouldn't be all the same, but think of this, you like cheese here in France, right? If you go to a meetup and they don't have lots of cheese, you will never come back, right? So just remember that. Those with the best cheese wins. Okay, so you know Swiss cheese. Swiss cheese has got bubbles in it. My idea was if we could start having the bubbles, then I could hopefully convince others to start their own bubbles. And they would be different. The bubbles are a separate experiment area. It's a separate experience area. It's a separate place that we can try things. And we'll get different solutions. But if the bubbles grow and they start overlapping, and we're all thinking about how can we make it so it's easier to make things better in the future, eventually we will have Swiss cheese that is only bubbles. And there would be no cheese at all. Do you understand this? Only bubbles. And then the original organization, the original system in place would disappear. Can that actually happen? I have no proof of that. That's what I was imagining could happen. But the way that I saw it happen there, we did get some, I was there for 4 years, and we made some headway on this. And I would say they've moved further along with it now than when I was there, because I left there in 2015. So eventually, I would like to see the whole organization this way. Okay, this requires that we have a chance to start small systems and give them a chance to grow. Now, whether they'll do what we want or not, most small systems never work. This is how evolution works. There are thousands of adaptations, and only a few of them are going to be advantageous, if that's the way evolution works. Okay? We have to have a chance for them to start and give them an opportunity to evolve. We don't know what good we'll get, but at least now we have a chance at getting good. It may be good, it may not be. So we protect them from the outside system by having them in a bubble. And I've now been able to do that at more than a few organizations, maybe a couple dozen. How long it stays, that depends on how many managers are willing to protect the bubbles and how long they stay in the company. Because a lot of times, you know, if a manager moves to another department or to a different company, you lose all the good that was being built underneath them. So there's no easy solution to that one, but I still think there's hope. So we have 2 more things to cover. Collaborate rather than communicate. Are we all still awake enough for me to continue? Okay, a few heads are nodding. Okay, I know how this is. I try to make it exciting. I put nice drawings in there. I try to be cheery, but yeah, okay. So I want to talk about the failure to communicate. You remember how I shared that? And I shared Wheel's law. Communication will usually fail except by accident. And he says usually, and I see it as always. Communication almost always fails, so it's not just usually. So remember I showed you this. There's my truth and your truth. All I say is we drag these things together so we're having the same experiences, and our attention span is on the same things. So when we worked in a waterfall, we're going to be like this. We're not getting the same experiences. As soon as or in a phase-gated approach or whatever, as soon as we can start experiencing these things together, we get the chance of combining my truth and your truth, so it becomes our truth. It doesn't make it a truth beyond other groups. It just means we can now operate in a slightly better manner. And this is what I saw happening with mob programming. When we draw this together as a pair, we get 2 threads instead of 1 thread on the experience. And we're gaining a shared understanding. Now, I'm talking about like what I'm saying is truths. I'm just saying this is how I think it is. This is what I noticed. As we added team members, we had more eyes on what we were doing, and we therefore had more threads, thin threads, getting into our judgments and our theories, not just the one. But a bigger thing happened too. As we added people, and we would have 5, 6, 7 people on a team, we had a lot more people looking at it, but it made each one of our experiences better. We were now understanding more because we had more perspectives. Yesterday, I was sitting in a restaurant, and I dropped a little one of those ear pod things or whatever on the ground. I couldn't see it. Now, I remembered something my father told me. I do this all the time. He says, if you drop something, you don't see it. You have to change your perspective. It's that simple. You stand up, you walk back a few feet, and now you look. And sure enough, I saw the thing. This happened to me literally yesterday, but this happens frequently. When we have more people, we have more perspectives. Now, it doesn't mean they're all going to work well together. But if we get good at working together, this is the benefit we get. And it's something more than happens. It's not that we just have more eyes on it. That attention is more focused because we're working through things more directly from start to finish without the cueing that slows us down. I talked about at the very beginning. Cueing means if I'm working on something alone and I have a question I can't answer, I have to go find someone to answer that question. And now I'm in a queue. I'm waiting to get an answer. If I find someone who can help me through an email, say I send an email, I wait for their email to come back and say, yeah, I think I have an answer for this. I can look at it tomorrow. Now I was in a queue waiting for the response, and now I'm in a queue till tomorrow to get the answer. But you know what's going to happen, right? Because communication always fails. They're going to give me the answer, and then I'll respond, well, that's not quite the right answer. And they'll respond back, remember, somebody always knows better than you what you meant with your message, and they'll say, no, that is the right answer. And then you have to write back, well, I didn't explain it well enough. And now you've gone 2 or 3 days. Have you ever had that happen? This happens all the time. And if it's an important thing, pretty soon their boss is included in the CCs, right? And then you have to put your boss in there. And now everybody sees that we're not getting anywhere. So this is the thing. As we started working together, we started getting not just more attention and more focused, but we were each getting a better understanding. Same experiences, viewed by more people, we're getting a shared understanding. So I think these are the reasons, or some of the reasons, mob programming works so well for us, or as I'm calling it, software teaming. So we're getting continuous alignment and continuous feedback. The big advantage of this is that we are getting feedback in real time. If I'm sitting with someone and they say, well, what we need is a list of the regions. And I put together the list of regions. They say, no, that's the states. I need the regions. We do that in real time immediately. But if they put it in a document and I misunderstood it, I could work a week on something. And then when they see it, they will say, no, that's not what I meant. The rapid feedback allows us to more quickly move from where we are to where we want to be. And I want to be critical about this. That's why product owners, users, testers, coders, database people, deployment people, we all are working together. It's not just the coders. So done well, I think mob programming is better called software teaming because it's the whole team working together to get this software created. Okay, so we're going to figure out how to turn up the good on collaboration. I'm going to stand up for a bit. Okay, so again, we get there with the tiny improvements habit. That's where we started this whole talk. The last thing I want to cover is lead from within, but I'm not going to cover this very much. I did a whole hour or so talk on this. What I found was that we can't have a leader guiding us. What we need to do is each one of us has to be a leader. We have to start learning, how do I lead from where I'm at within the organization? So this is kind of the way that I like to put it. There is no hero coming to save us. If a hero is there, we are going to be that hero. We have to take that responsibility. And if we don't, we will not ever get the improvements we need. And to be really clear, our problems nowadays have nothing to do with software. They have to do with the political atmosphere. They have to do with climate change. We have a lot bigger problems, and we need to start pulling together, I think. And if we don't, we're really going to be in a mess. So here's the thing. We need to be our own hero. So we need to be able to keep this sustainable, whatever it is we're doing. We need to be willing to step forward with the right thing at the right time and in the right way. The only reason I'm here today is because in 2011 or maybe early 2012, somebody noticed the way we were working. He came to give us some training we were asking for, and he started telling other people. And if other people heard about it, they would send us an email saying, we want to learn about this thing you're doing, which we were calling mob programming at that time. We didn't know how to do that. We say, well, come and visit us, spend a day with us. We had people come from all around the area, but we had people come from Winnipeg, 2,000 miles away, from Stockholm, whatever, 6,000 miles away. People came to see what we were doing. And then we realized maybe we're doing something that's important. We better take this seriously. How can we explain it to people? So we had to learn how to contribute back into the community. So to me, this is the Swedish concept of lagom, which is just enough, not too little, not too much. To make it sustainable, we need to do this in a sustainable manner. I really like this thought, barely sufficient. So as we learn to talk about this, the very first thing I wanted to do is get other people doing it so their experiences could help grow the idea. And some of the first people to pick up on it, remember, the fundamental concepts, I think, came from Paris, from the coding dojo's idea that they were experimenting with here. And as it got to the US and got to my team, and then as we started sharing it, somebody in Sweden saw us, we had made a little 3-minute video showing us working this way and put it in YouTube. They saw it in 2012, and so they said, let's try it, and they started doing it. So we're finding teams all over the world who are just hearing about it and trying it. We weren't really doing trainings. I didn't give my first training until 2013, and it happened to be in Sweden. Sweden was kind of ahead of the curve on this one. So there we go. I like this quote. That looks like a French guy, doesn't it? He wasn't. Robert Henry, that was how he pronounced his name. Robert Henry. How would you pronounce that here? Robert Henry. Henry. He was from Illinois, I think. I don't think you would call it Illinois here, right? But, and his father was a murderer. So he didn't want to use his father's last name. And he wanted to be an artist. So he picked a name that he thought an artist would have. And that's the story I understand. But if you look him up, he's a well-known artist in the Ashcan movement, which is an anti-academical movement from 100 years ago. But look at this saying. This is why I'm sharing it. The object isn't to make art. It's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. Now, I learned this in my 20s. And I'd kind of like to tell the story of it. Is it too late for one more story? The person that shared this with me, I contacted him. I was maybe, let's say, 27 or 28. And I was a sign painter. A sign painter paints letters on walls and trucks, on boards. And I saw this person, and their work was beautiful, very elegant lettering. His lettering was just impeccable. And if you went up it, like I went up close to it and looked at it, you could see he would do one brush stroke to get a very elegant shape. Everything he did was just beautiful. So I contacted him. I said, can you teach me to letter like that? He said, I can show you how to letter like that, but there's something way more important for me to share. So I went down to see him, and this is what he shared with me. Now, he showed me how to letter the letters he makes. But he said the problem with that is your brushes are different than my brushes. You have to understand your brush before you can let the brush make the shapes it can make. That's probably the most important thing I've said all day. Does that make sense to you? You have to understand what shapes that brush can make, and those will be by nature elegant. Because some squirrel in Siberia had its hair taken from it and brought to some person who makes brushes, who put those hairs together in a perfect way on a piece of wood with a little ferrule, and they would bind it with wire, so that when you take that brush and you let it do what it does, it will make elegant shapes, but you need to discover what the shapes that brush makes. I don't think I need to go too much more into that. He put it a little more religious. He said, God built that into the squirrel. God put that into the squirrel. Now, I'm pretty sure God is not doing that. But you get the picture? How they figured that out, I don't know. I watched a thing once. Somebody showed a thing of an Egyptian decoration in a pyramid. And it showed where a stripe of very even width started and went about 4 or 5 feet before it ended. A single stroke done by somebody who understood his tools, understood his materials, understood the substrate, understood what all that would do. It was amazing to me to see that. That's what we're talking about here. What do we need to do to create the environment where the great things will happen? What can we do? So there we go. I think I covered way too much, and I should have made a slide that said, how would I say it in French? Merci beaucoup.